Namaste and welcome to the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston and to our Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna class. So I'll begin as always with a chant. Om Sarva Jiva Papanashakaranam Bhaveshwaram Swikritang cha garbhavasa deha pashamidrisham yapitam swalilaya cha yena divya jivanam yapitam swalilaya cha yena divya jivanam Tannamami Deva Deva Ramakrishna Ishwaram. Om Shri Vivekanandari Satchishya Supujitaya Shri Sharada Devya Virata Sevitaya Shri Ramakrishna Paramahamsaya Avatara Varishtaya Chate Namaha. Om Tava Katamritam Tapta Jivanam Kavibiriditam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Shrimadatatam Bhuvi Grinandiye Bhuridajana. So this morning we will begin Thursday, March 29th, 1883. And in those who have the English Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna that follows the New York edition pagination, it's the bottom of page 194, in the chapter on the Master's birthday celebration at Dakshineshwar. So this is already a couple of weeks after his birthday celebration, but it's in the same chapter called his birthday celebration. So again, March 29th, 1883. The Master had taken a little rest after his noon meal when a few devotees arrived from Calcutta, among them Amrita and the well-known singer of the Brahmo Samaj, Trailokya. So that is Trilokinath Sanyal, who was a frequent visitor to Sri Ramakrishna. He was a member of the Brahmo Samaj, a musician, and he also wrote songs for the Brahmo Samaj. And one of the things we notice is that after Keshav Chandra Sen met Sri Ramakrishna, and Sri Ramakrishna began through Keshav and subsequently through other leaders of the Brahmo Samaj, began to influence the Brahmo Samaj, the songs of the Brahmo Samaj became more and more spiritual. And so some of the songs were very beautiful that the Brahmo Samaj had. Though Sri Ramakrishna used to laugh because they started adding to their songs that we surrender at your feet and such statements of devotion that are typical in Indian songs. And Sri Ramakrishna said, well, where did the formless get feet? But the songs, some of the songs were quite beautiful in the later period of the Brahmo Samaj. Rakal was not feeling well. The Master was greatly worried about him and said to the devotees, you see, Rakal is not well. Will soda water help him? What am I to do now? Rakal, please take the prasad from the Jagannath temple. So first of all, asking about soda water, we can imagine that not feeling well must mean he had some digestive problems, and soda water is for calming acidity. So it must have been something digestive. And one wonders when seeing this, as many people at the time, many of his other disciples and visitors wondered at the time, that was Sri Ramakrishna becoming too attached? Because here he is, he's supposed to be a Paramahamsa, he's a realized soul, he's supposed to be always absorbed in God, and here he is worrying about Rakal. this young teenage boy, late teenage, but still he had the nature of a young child, even at that age. And Sri Ramakrishna is here worried about him, just like a worldly parent might be worried about their child. So what is going on? Well, of course, as we know from studying the life of Sri Ramakrishna, that he saw, and as we'll see shortly in the text here, he saw God within Rakal, and he had the attitude of Yashoda, the mother of Sri Krishna, or the foster mother, of course, of Sri Krishna, who brought Sri Krishna up in Vrindavan. And just as Chandramani, the actual mother of Sri Ramakrishna, she used to worry over him all of the time, but that was part of her bhava towards the incarnation of God. And so Sri Ramakrishna had that attitude towards Rakal. So it was not born of worldly attachment. It was born of the attitude he had taken on. Just as Holy Mother, at the end of her life, when she didn't want to see Radhu, her niece, whom she used to dote on all of the time, and Swami Sarananda became very worried that she wasn't paying attention to Radhu, because he knew that if that happened, her mind would go back to Brahman and she would pass away. And so he tried to interest her in Radhu. Said, "Mother, shall we not bring Radhu?" And Mother said, "I've lost all interest in her." Then Swami Sarananda knew that there was no hope. And so Sri Ramakrishna also could give up an attitude like this at a moment's notice if there was a spiritual reason for doing so. But he assumed the attitude of Yashoda towards the boy Rakal, and the text will explain more why he had that attitude. Another thing to note here, this is just a small note, but it's culturally interesting, religious culture. He suggests that Rakal be given some prasad from the Jagannath temple. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that Brahman, the Absolute, has become physically visible in four substances. One is Ganga Jal, the water of the Ganges. That is visible Brahman. And so the water of the Ganges has always been sacred. We keep some here. Other temples keep Ganges water because it's considered to be very holy. And Sri Ramakrishna said that it's visible Brahman. He said the dust of Vrindavan. And so many people going to Vrindavan will collect some of the dust from the ground in Vrindavan. He said that the very dust of Vrindavan is visible Brahman. The air of Kashi, the very air in Benares, in the sacred part of Benares, within the markers of the two rivers, is the very air of Benares is visible Brahman. And of course, what we're seeing here is the food, the prasad of Jagannath. And so many people, including many of our swamis, they keep some dried rice, the individual grains of rice. It was cooked rice offered in the Jagannath temple, and then it's dried out, and so the individual grains are dried. So it's not just a clump of matted dried rice, but individual dried grains. And that's actually sold to people. And so many keep a little pouch of that dried Jagannath prasad and take a grain a day. Just as you might take a drop of Ganges water every day, if you live far from the Ganges and you can't keep buckets full of it, you take a drop a day, or you put a little on your hands before you do puja, or some like Swami Satprakashananda would always take a drop of Ganges water on his palm before he would pick up his japa mala, his rosary, to do japa. And so they take a piece of Jagannath Prasad because the Hindu belief, and a belief that was confirmed as true by the experience of Sri Ramakrishna and the Holy Mother, is that eating prasad of a holy place, that purifies the mind and the body. And so because the Jagannath Prasad, Sri Ramakrishna himself considered the holiest of prasads, that is considered a great purifier. So many people take a grain of that every day to purify the body and mind. Even as he spoke these words of concern for Rakal, the master underwent a strange transformation. He looked at Rakal with the infinite tenderness of a mother and affectionately uttered the name of Govinda. Did he see in Rakal the manifestation of God himself? The disciple Rakal was a young boy of pure heart who had renounced all attraction to lust and greed. And Sri Ramakrishna was intoxicated day and night with love of God. At the sight of Rakal, his eyes expressed the tender feelings of a mother, a love like that which had filled the heart of Mother Yashoda at the sight of the baby Krishna. The devotees gazed at the master in wonder as he went into deep samadhi. As his soul soared into the realm of divine consciousness, his body became motionless, his eyes were fixed on the tip of his nose, and his breathing almost ceased. So here we can see clearly that it was not based on attachment that he was concerned with Rakal, because looking at Rakal, he transcended the visible universe and was absorbed in God. It says that he looked on Rakal with eyes of great tenderness, like Yashoda looking at her child Krishna. Yashoda is considered the archetype of the Vatsalya Bhava, the attitude of that one takes that I am the mother of God. In the Christian world, it's generally not done, though it would certainly be possible. That one could take the attitude that I am the mother of Christ, and thereby feel that I am Mary, the mother of Christ. As here, one takes the attitude that I am the mother of Krishna. So because that was the attitude that Sri Ramakrishna had, the idea of concern with the welfare of the object of his love was also there. And so he repeats, as he's looking at Rakal, he repeats the name Govinda. And of course, Govinda is one of the many names of Sri Krishna, one of the common, well-known names of Sri Krishna. There are many, many names of Sri Krishna. Some are little known, some are very well known. Gopala, Govinda, Krishna, of course. And so he utters that because, again, he had seen in a vision before Rakal came to him. The Divine Mother came with a baby in her arms and said, "Here, this is your son." And Sri Ramakrishna said, "What? How can I have a son?" And she said, "No, not a son of the body. He's a son of your own mind. He's a son of your own spirit. That he's a mind-born son, Manasa Putra, a son born of your own spiritual attitude." Because Sri Ramakrishna had prayed to the Divine Mother that I want a companion who has the same attitude as I have. And so that was, Rakal was the answer, the Divine Mother's answer to his prayer. And so before Rakal came, when Rakal was actually coming in the boat to Dakshineshwar, Sri Ramakrishna saw on the Ganges a lotus blossom, and there in the lotus was Sri Krishna and a cowherd boy dancing with Sri Krishna. And when Rakal came to him, got off the boat and came into the temple, or into Sri Ramakrishna's room, Sri Ramakrishna recognized him as the cowherd boy who had been dancing on the lotus with Sri Krishna. And then Sri Ramakrishna asked him lovingly, "What is your name?" And he said, "Rakal," which means a cowherd. And so that also sent him into ecstasy. So here again, we see that there was no tinge of worldliness in his relationship with or concern about Rakal. And as his eyes became fixed on the tip of his nose, his breathing practically stopped, and he was in deep samadhi. Then continues, an unknown Bengali, dressed in the ochre cloth of a monk, entered the room and sat on the floor. The master's mind was coming down to the ordinary plane of consciousness. Presently, he began to talk, though the spell of samadhi still lingered. So still there's his mind is, because of the signs in his body, Shrima M could see from the signs in Sri Ramakrishna's face and body that he was still, part of his mind was still lingering at the verge of samadhi, and he was just beginning to come back to awareness of the outer world so that he could engage, but he wasn't fully engaged yet. Master, at the sight of the ochre cloth of this Bengali who had come and sat on the floor in the ochre cloth, why this Garawa, that is ochre cloth? Should one put on such a thing for a mere fancy? A man once said, I have exchanged the Chandi for a drum. At first he used to sing the holy songs of the Chandi. Now he beats the drum. All laugh. Meaning that his singing the songs of the Chandi was just for entertainment. There wasn't anything deeper. I sing the songs of the Chandi, I beat on a drum, it's all the same thing. It's just making some noise for fun to keep myself entertained because I like some sound, I like music. And so the Chandi drum doesn't make any difference, one or the other. So here we see that Sri Ramakrishna, partly perhaps, we don't know, but could be, because he was just returning from samadhi where the mind was extremely sensitive. Of course, in any state, Sri Ramakrishna could see into the heart of people and see their true motivations, their true nature, and so forth. That would happen at any time when he would see someone. He would see their past and future, their present nature, and all about them. As he would say, it would be like looking at a person, like looking into a glass case where you see everything inside of the glass case. But at this time, because he's coming down from samadhi, it's not only that, but the contradiction between hypocrisy and the truth. He was the mind was especially sensitive because of he was still coming down from that high state where he was immersed in the real truth, the absolute truth, where this whole universe is itself is just like a shadow. And so then seeing in the midst of that someone who is a hypocrite, hypocritically wearing the ochre cloth, that he couldn't stand. And of course, Sri Ramakrishna was never a respecter of persons. He could be appropriate to the situation, but if that being appropriate by social standards went against the truth, then he wouldn't bear it. And so here he obviously sees through the heart of this man wearing the Gera cloth and sees that it is just a fancy. So he asks, why this Gera? Should one put on such a thing for a mere fancy? Meaning he saw that it was just for a mere fancy. Like the man who used to sing the Chandi and now he beats the drum, same thing, doesn't matter. It's all just having fun, making some noise, making a little music to keep myself entertained. So he goes on, there are 3 or 4 varieties of renunciation. Afflicted with miseries at home, one may put on the ochre cloth of a monk, but that renunciation doesn't last long. Again, a man out of work puts on an ochre wearing cloth and goes off to Benares. After 3 months, he writes home, I have a job here. I shall come back home in a few days. Don't worry about me. Again, a man may have everything he wants. He lacks nothing, yet he does not enjoy his possessions. He weeps for God alone. That is real renunciation. And so the other types of renunciation are where one has a temporary spirit of renunciation because you're going through trouble. And of course, that comes to everybody. Even people who have no idea of spiritual renunciation, they have no spiritual idea in their life, not even the idea of monasticism as a possibility. But you have trouble at home, you think about just leaving the whole thing. Let me just get out of here and get away from all of these problems. I don't need this. That's not what I got married for all of these problems and so forth. I want to be free. So that kind of renunciation, when it comes in the guise of renunciation of the world, so a person who knows about sannyasa, knows what sannyasa means, at least outwardly, and they're going through trouble, and suddenly they feel, who needs all of this? I'll just wander off to the Himalayas and live in a cave and get my food by begging, and I won't have any of these problems. So Sri Ramakrishna says, that type of renunciation doesn't last. It's brought on by temporary sufferings in life. And he often used this example of the man who gets disgusted with life at home or at work, and he leaves home and goes off to Benares. And after 3 months, he writes back and says, sometimes as he tells the story, he tells it a little differently sometimes. He says that he writes back that I'm here in Benares, I'm well, I've got a job here, so please bring the children, and I've got a place for us to stay. So moves his family to Benares. No lie, that is falsehood lie, no lie of any sort is good. A false garb, even though a holy one, is not good. If the outer garb does not correspond to the inner thought, it gradually brings ruin. Uttering false words or doing false deeds, one gradually loses all fear. Far better is the white cloth of a householder. Attachment to worldliness, occasional lapses from the ideal, and an outer garb of Geruva, how dreadful. So that Sri Ramakrishna would insist on over and over. Holy Mother would say the same when people would come to her and tell her that they wanted to renounce the world. Then some people, Holy Mother certainly would encourage to renounce the world. Other people, she would say, no, it's better to stay in the white cloth as I wear. Pointing to her own white sari that she would wear. Say, better to remain in the white cloth as I am, because in the life of sannyasa, there's so many dangers and so many problems. The problem of egotism, that I am a sannyasi, so I'm ever better than everybody else. I'm a sannyasi, so I'm special. I'm a sannyasi, so I'm a teacher of other people. I'm a sannyasi, and so I should be worshipped by other people. All of these are ideas that come very easily to the sannyasi. And Holy Mother also said something which many of us don't have to worry about, many of us sannyasis don't have to worry about, but some do. She said that a person who, through their tapasya and their spiritual practice, they get a certain luster and a certain beauty that comes through physically. And so then that they become very proud of, their beautiful appearance, and they begin to cultivate their beautiful appearance and so forth. And so many difficulties that many people, not all, if she saw someone was ready for it, she would encourage them wholeheartedly. But others she would discourage, as Sri Ramakrishna is here. And so going back to the beginning of that paragraph, no lie of any sort is good. So he is saying that wearing the Geruva cloth, but not living the life of a sannyasi, hiding desires behind the and ambitions and so forth behind the Geruva cloth, that is a lie. And that's not good. No lie of any sort is good. So meaning no hypocrisy of any sort is good. A false garb, even though a holy one, is not good. Again, he says, going back through the same paragraph. And he says that if the outer garb doesn't correspond to the inner spirit, then that's a lie. That's not good. And he says it gradually brings ruin. It brings ruin because what we are inside gradually comes out. And so if we're pretending to be a person of renunciation, but inside we're harboring desires and ambitions and so forth, gradually that's going to come out, and it brings ruin. It brings ruin to the person, and if they become a leader of others, a teacher, a guru, in a formal or informal sense, then it brings ruin to both. I've known many people who became followers of teachers. They took a guru, and the guru turned out to be false, and it was devastating for the disciple. The guru turned out to be a hypocrite, got involved in all kinds of scandals, not deniable scandals, actual involvement, not just rumors or something like that, because that is dangerous also for a sadhu. Unscrupulous people know that the quickest way to ruin the reputation and therefore the influence of a holy person is to spread rumors about them, false rumors. But if a person is actually involved in scandal, I knew a number of disciples of different teachers who it was found that their teachers were leading a hypocritical life, a scandalous life. In many cases, it ruined the person's devotion. It ruined the ability to put faith in anything. They had been cheated once, and so now they don't want to be cheated again. It's tragic. I've seen a number of tragic situations where people had a spiritual hankering. They came to a teacher. They put all of their faith in the teacher. They shouldn't have without having tested, but they did. They thought that what they saw looked good, and the man or woman made many promises, and it turned out that they were false. And then they found that it was impossible to believe in anything, impossible to put faith in anything. And so there were people who still tried to meditate after that, but then the meditation that they had learned from their teacher, it always brought to mind the idea of the teacher, and so they couldn't do it because it was everything became tinged for them. So uttering false words or doing false deeds, one gradually loses all fear. Now that's interesting. What that means, I think, the way I interpret that is that if you say false things and you do false things, you act falsely and you speak falsely, one thing leads to another. You pretend to be something, and then you have to do something else to support that falsehood, and you have to do other things to support those falsehoods, and then it becomes a habit. And then you yourself are caught because now you've lived a lie, but you have to sustain it because now people have believed it, and you don't want to be caught as a hypocrite. So you do everything to sustain the lie. And gradually you become so coarsened that you feel nothing. And you see that with people, public figures, as well as people we may know in our private life. But we have plenty of people visible in public life who tell so many lies that they don't care anymore. It doesn't matter. I've even known people who told so many lies so consistently and so habitually that a time came in their life after many years where they themselves couldn't tell the difference between their own lies and the truth. They would tell a lie to another person, knowing that that person had been involved in the same situation, seen the same thing as they themselves, and this person would lie about it, but not even stop to think that, well, this person saw the same thing and they know the truth. They know that I'm lying. No. They were so caught up in the delusion of their own lies that they actually began to believe it themselves. It's a very strange thing. I remember a man like that, one that I knew well. He got to the point where I saw him in an old age after many years, and he was living in the life of his own delusion. He didn't know the difference between lies and truth anymore. He'd lost the distinction. It was a very sad state to be in. And so one loses all fear. It means one loses the fear of lying because you lie all of the time. And again, we see that. We see that happening in front of us. It is not proper for a righteous person to tell a lie or do something false, even in a dramatic performance. Once I went to Keshav's house to see the performance of a place called Navabrindavan. They brought something on the stage which they called the cross. Another actor sprinkled water, which they said was the water of peace. I saw a third actor staggering and reeling in the role of a drunkard, Brahmo devotee. It was K. We don't know who K was. Somebody whose name started with K. Master, it is not good for a devotee to play such parts. It is bad for the mind to dwell on such subjects for a long time. The mind is like white linen, fresh from the laundry. It takes the color in which you dip it. If it is associated with falsehood for a long time, it will be stained with falsehood. So now here this whole discussion is very interesting. He says it's not good for a devotee even to tell a lie in a dramatic performance. That is, to play the part in a dramatic performance of a hypocrite or an evil character, because it colors the mind. And so that, of course, is advice that's going to ruin the career of many actors and actresses. You can't be much of an actor unless you're willing to play bad parts also. But Sri Ramakrishna is not saying in general. Sri Ramakrishna used to enjoy plays. He went to Girish's theater often. But what he's talking about is a devotee. Because here he's talking to this person who's come dressed up in Garawa, who is a hypocrite. And so he's impressing on the minds of others that if you are a devotee, even in a dramatic performance, you shouldn't play the part of a liar, of a cheat, of a hypocrite, of an evil character, because doing that will color the mind. And then he says something very interesting. A well-known example of his, he used it often, and so those of you who are familiar with his teachings know this example. He said, the mind is like a white, freshly laundered linen piece of cloth. Whatever color you dip it in, it takes on the color. So notice that he's not saying that the purified mind is like a freshly laundered piece of white cloth that takes on the color of anything. No, the mind, your mind, everyone's mind, is now like a freshly laundered piece of white cloth that takes on the color you dip it in. And so it's not a question of, I've purified my mind so much and now I go into a bad place and it's affected by all of these samskaras, so I have to be careful because I have purified myself so much. No, the mind is colored by the color of the situation it puts itself into. And so the mind of all of us is like a freshly laundered white cloth. Wherever we put that mind, it takes on that color. So we, even as beginners, have to be careful where we put the mind, because it's going to absorb the color of that which we put it into. He continues, another day I went to Keshav's house to see the play called Nimai Sannyas. Nimai means Sri Chaitanya, Mahaprabhu, Sri Chaitanya. And Nimai Sannyas means when Sri Chaitanya took sannyasa from his teacher. He goes on, Sri Ramakrishna goes on, some flattering disciples of Keshav spoiled the whole performance. One of them said to Keshav, you are the Chaitanya of the Kali Yuga. Keshav pointed to me and asked with a smile, then who is he? I replied, why, I am the servant of your servant, dasa dasoham in Sanskrit. I am a speck of the dust of your feet. Keshav had a desire for name and fame. And so Sri Ramakrishna could never have said such a thing as Keshav said. And so Sri Ramakrishna had great love for Keshav, and he had regard for Keshav too. He saw that he was basically sincere and was much more advanced than other Brahmo devotees, that he had a true hunger for God. He was advancing on the path, and through the influence of Sri Ramakrishna, he was advancing much faster. But he also saw that Keshav was not there yet. He still had weaknesses. And one of the weaknesses Keshav had was a desire for name and fame, which he had plenty of. Hopefully in that life, by the time Keshav died, he had experienced enough name and fame and the hollowness that they bring, that in that life Keshav finished with that experience and won't need it when he comes back again. Because he was one of the most prominent people in India at the time, known around the world. Not known by common people around the world, but known by those who were aware of Indian culture and the Indian situation. People like Max Muller, people like religious figures in the West who heard about Keshav Sen, and he had even met the Queen, which was the ultimate glory for an aspiring Indian of the class of Western educated Indians. To have met the Queen meant that you were really somebody. There was the secular equivalent of a Musliman in India going on Hajj to Mecca and coming back and having been to Mecca. That, of course, is a sacred pilgrimage. I'm not saying it's the same as seeing the Queen. No, that's a sacred pilgrimage. But it's the secular equivalent of going on Hajj to Mecca. And so having gone to see the Queen meant that you had to be, and not seeing the Queen from a distance that she's traveling by carriage. No, he had an audience with the Queen where she saw him also. So he was very famous, but he had a desire for name and fame. So when the devotee, as Sri Ramakrishna said, the sycophants around Keshav, they spoiled the whole play because of this. So this is what spoiled the whole play, because it brought an atmosphere of hypocrisy and rajasic show to the whole thing. So when the devotee said to Keshav, "You are the Chaitanya of the new age," and Keshav, instead of saying, as he should have had enough self-awareness to say, no, I'm just an ordinary person. Instead of that, he sort of accepts the compliment, but he knows Sri Ramakrishna is there also, so he has to say something. So he doesn't want to deflect the compliment, but he also wants to include Sri Ramakrishna. So he says, well, then who is he? With a shy smile on his face. But Sri Ramakrishna always had the appropriate, truthful answer to every situation. And so he says, I'm the dust of your feet. I'm a speck of the dust of your feet, meaning I'm a nobody. So that was why Sri Ramakrishna didn't like three terms he didn't like to be called. He didn't like to be called karta, which is a term used in tantric circles, especially in Bengal. I don't know about outside of Bengal, but in Bengal tantric circles, for a tantric adept and a teacher, like a guru. So he didn't like to be called karta, he didn't like to be called baba, and he didn't like to be called guru. So nowadays everybody calls him Guru Maharaj. But when he was in the body, he didn't like to be called karta, Baba, meaning father, but Baba is also used for a Babaji, a spiritual holy man, or Guru. To Amrita, Sri Ramakrishna speaking to Amrita and Trailokya, these two devotees of the Brahma Samaj who had come. Youngsters like Narendra, later Swami Vivekananda, and Rakal, later Swami Brahmananda, are ever perfect, Nitya Siddha. Every time they are born, they are devoted to God. That is, they come into the world with devotion to God. An ordinary man acquires a little devotion after austerities and a hard struggle. So that's us. But these boys have love of God from the very moment of their birth. They are like the natural image of Shiva, the Swayambhu Shiva, which springs forth from the earth and is not set up by human hands, like the Jyotirlingam, the 12 Jyotirlingams which are said to have sprung from the earth in different parts of India. Or Swayambhu Lingams, those which spring from the earth itself, which were not established by people. So Rakal and Narendra were like that. Born with deep devotion. I was just reading this morning in the Great Master, the Lila Prasanga, about in the last section, the fifth section of the Great Master, about the Master and Narendranath. So Swami Sarananda is talking about Narendranath even before he came to the Master, how he had a deep love for God, that even at that time, is something that's generally not known, even at that time when he was a teenager, by the time he came to the Master, he had been practicing meditation and austerities in his home. He was a vegetarian. He slept on the hard floor. Sometimes he put a blanket on the floor, sometimes just on the naked floor he slept. And was practicing austerities like that because of his hunger for God. So again, this was before he met Sri Ramakrishna. And that's why when he came to Sri Ramakrishna was struck with wonder to see how could a person of such purity, such deep devotion, and such knowledge, and such purity of mind and concentration of mind, spontaneous meditation, how could such a person be born in a worldly city like Calcutta? That was at that time in the 1800s. Imagine what he would think of Calcutta today. And not putting any blame on Calcutta, any modern city, anywhere in the world. What would he think about that? So even at that time, he said, how could such a person be born in a city like Calcutta? So Swamiji, again, Narendra and Rakal were Nitya Siddha. They were ever perfect from birth. And they came into this world with spiritual propensities. The ever perfect, the Nitya Siddhas, form a class by themselves. Not all birds have crooked beaks. The ever perfect are never attached to the world. There is the instance of Prahlad. So Prahlad, the great devotee, whose story is told in the Vishnu Purana and in the Srimad Bhagavata, was the emblem of someone who was born with devotion to God. In this case, devotion to Vishnu. And his father tried to torture it out of his son, but he couldn't, because he had this spontaneous devotion, born with the devotion. And so Narendra and Rakal and several others, Yogen, Baburam, Nitya Niranjan, and Purna, they also were Nitya Siddhas like that. Ordinary people practice spiritual discipline and cultivate devotion to God, but they also become attached to the world and are caught in the glamour of woman and gold. They are like flies which sit on a flower or a sweetmeat and light on filth as well. So that's ordinary people. As we practice, we try to overcome that so that the mind only goes to the flower. But we start out like this, whereas Narendra and Rakal, they didn't start like that. They started out as a bee. A bee never, honeybee, never goes and lands on filth. It goes only to flowers from the time it first begins to leave the hive. And so Rakal and Narendra were like that, not like flies. The devotion of the ever-perfect is not like the ordinary devotion that one acquires as a result of strenuous spiritual discipline. Ritualistic devotion consists in repeating the name of God and performing worship in a prescribed manner. It is like crossing a rice field in a roundabout way along the balk, that is the dams between the rice fields. Again, it is like reaching a nearby village by boat in a roundabout way along a winding river. So why roundabout? Why is he saying that? Because we have the load of past karma, which doesn't allow us to see a straight path. People like Rakal and Narendra, they're born perfect. And so from their youth itself, they feel an intense longing to go towards God. They're not attracted by other things. But we, ordinary jivas, because of the load of past karma from this and many past lives, we have so many attractions to so many things. And so we go this way, we go that way, we try to find our way this way, we try to find happiness there. So that is going round about. And finally, in the midst of all of these experiences, we begin to feel some devotion. We begin to search for spiritual life. We begin to get a sense that, yes, there is something worthwhile over there, and we begin to make our way, but still the mind pushes us this way and that way. So we're like the person making his way through the rice paddy fields, walking along the balk, along the dams that form the borders of the paddy field to hold the water, or the person going on a winding river towards another village. One does not follow the injunctions of ceremonial worship when one develops raga bhakti, when one loves God as one's own. Then it is like crossing a rice field after the harvest. When the field is dry, you can walk straight across the field. You don't have to walk along the balk. You can go straight across the field in any direction. So here in the previous paragraph and this one, he's talking about people like us, ordinary devotees. We have to follow Vaidhi Bhakti. Vaidhi Bhakti. That is bhakti which is based on vidhis and nishedhas. Vidhi meaning injunctions, nishedhas forbidden things. So certain things that we're forbidden to do, if we want to do, not forbidden to do in the ordinary sense that no, that's bad, don't do that because you shouldn't do it, just because you shouldn't do it, or because the book says you shouldn't do it. No. things that are forbidden, because if you want to develop devotion, then doing those things will harm your development of devotion. So we always have to remember, and especially in the West, and not just in the West, but outside of India, where this tradition is not, there's not a context for the tradition, that when in a Vedantic text, in a Hindu text, it said that you should do this and not to do that, it's not just because some holy people didn't like you doing certain things, or God doesn't like you to do certain things. No, it's because certain things harm your development of devotion, and certain things help it. So do the things that help, don't do the things that harm it. If you want to do the things that harm it, go ahead. You're free. Do what you like. Do anything. Go out, hurt people, rob banks. Do whatever you want to do. Whatever you want to do. But you'll find you have to suffer, because it's in the nature of the universe itself that you will be hurting yourself by doing such things. So the vidhis and nishedhas, the injunctions and the prohibitions, those are based on the experience of people who found that doing these things hurts your spiritual path. Doing these things helps your spiritual path. So in the beginning, we want to develop devotion, we want to follow a spiritual life, we want to progress. And so we are told that by doing certain things, we will progress. Sit for meditation at certain times every day. Have a regular practice. Do a japa every day. Do at least 108. Or if you can do more, then establish a higher number that you do every day. Consistently every day do that. And sometimes if you can, do more, but always do this many. Lay flowers on the altar. Offer incense. Keep an altar. Keep the altar clean. All of these are vidhis, injunctions. Sing devotional songs, study the holy books, and so forth. Those are all vidhis, those are all injunctions. If you do these things, gradually you will begin to develop the beginnings of devotion. And don't do these things over here, because it will take you in the opposite direction. So that is the bhakti that we have to follow. Vaidhi bhakti, bhakti which is rules-based, because the rules are not arbitrary. Again, it's not God likes some things and doesn't like other things. He'll get angry if you do the things he doesn't like just because he happens not to like them. No, because these things help, those things hurt. And we want to go there, so we want to do the things that help. But he says that when we get raga bhakti, that is para bhakti, supreme devotion, then all rules drop away. Even an ordinary jiva like us, if we are lucky enough to come to the point where we develop that supreme devotion, then all rules drop away for us. We no longer have to think about how many times should I do japa, should I lay flowers this way, how should I bow down, where should I bow down, what books should I read, how should I pray, how many times should I pray. All of that is gone. Once we have spontaneous love for God, deep spontaneous love for God, abiding love for God, then all rules are over. Then it's just, as he says, you just go straight towards God. You don't have to think about anything else. You don't have to think about, I should do this or I shouldn't do that. There are no more should or shouldn'ts. That doesn't mean that you can do, that you will do anything. No, because you have come to a point, because of your love for God, that doing something that is contrary won't even come to the mind, because that's not where you're going. You're seeing this in front of you. You want to go there. Other things don't distract you at all. So that is a state of spontaneous devotion where no rules have to be observed whatsoever. But it doesn't mean that therefore you become amoral, or certainly not immoral. It just means that your spontaneous, your behavior is spontaneous because of the attraction of God, and that's all that you care about. Other things you couldn't care less about. So when the country is flooded deep with water, one doesn't have to follow the winding river. Then the fields are deep underwater. You can row your boat straight to the village, so you no longer have to go like this, but you go straight to the village with raga bhakti, para bhakti, supreme devotion. Without this intense attachment, this passionate love for God, one cannot realize God. So why haven't we realized God? Because we don't yet have that. Once we have that, then the realization of God will be in front of us. But without it, we still have to practice Vaidhi Bhakti, that is rules-based bhakti, in order to develop it. Amrita, the devotee. Sir, how do you feel in samadhi? Master, you may have heard that the cockroach, by intently meditating on the Brahmara, the black bee, is transformed into a Brahmara. Do you know how I feel then? I feel like a fish released from a pot into the water of the Ganges. So that was a belief in around the world in cultures, not about the cockroach and the Brahmara, but in all around the world there was a belief that some insects would develop into another insect by intently thinking on the other insect, or out of intense fear of that insect, and then they would be transformed into the insect. And so he uses that as an example that by thinking intently of the divine, then you become transformed into the divine. And so that's what he feels like when he's in samadhi, that by the mind becoming intently focused on the divine, he enters into the divine, becomes the divine. And he says, I feel like a fish released from a tub into the pond. So just as a fish which has been confined, a fish which was caught and put in a pot perhaps for eating later, but is put back in the water, and the tremendous joy of the fish, which swims, and if you've ever seen that, I have seen it, a fish being put back into the water, and it swims this way and that, suddenly it's free. It's free. So Sri Ramakrishna feels like that in samadhi. Amrita, don't you feel at that time even a trace of ego? Master, yes, generally a little of it remains. However hard you may rub a grain of gold against a grindstone, still a bit of it always remains. Or again, take the case of a big fire. The ego is like one of its sparks. In samadhi, I lose outer consciousness completely. But God generally keeps a little trace of ego in me for the enjoyment of divine communion. Enjoyment is possible only when I and you remain. Again, sometimes God effaces even that trace of I. Then one experiences Jada Samadhi or Nirvikalpa Samadhi. That experience cannot be described. A salt doll went to measure the depth of the ocean. But before it had gone far into the water, it melted away. It became entirely one with the water of the ocean. Then who was to come back and tell the ocean's depth? So that analogy of the salt doll, that actually the first place I know of that coming is in Dhyaneshwar, the Maharashtrian saint. When he wrote his Dhyaneshwari, commentary on the Gita, he uses that expression of the salt doll going to measure the depth of the ocean, but then who is going to measure what? Because the salt doll merges into the ocean. So the soul, when going to measure Brahman, going to realize Brahman, and with the idea of I want to find out what Brahman is, you enter in and you become the ocean itself. Then who is going to say what about whom? You've merged into the infinite. So he says here in the previous paragraph, I read the two paragraphs together because now it's time to close. He says that generally when going into samadhi, there's a slight trace of ego. That doesn't mean egotism as we experience egotism. That is the unripe ego, which is a source of pride and jealousy and likes and dislikes and all of that. No, just the slightest trace of individuality. So he would go beyond that into the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi from time to time, and he had spent 6 months in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. But because he had incarnated for a particular historic purpose, he always tried to maintain some sort of connection to the relative world so that he wouldn't be lost forever in samadhi, so that he would come back and fulfill the purpose of his incarnation. And so he would retain usually a trace of the slightest, most subtle trace of individualized consciousness, so that he could follow that back into manifestation in order to carry on the work that he had been born to do. And he was always afraid that Swami Vivekananda, who had been born also to help in his mission, that Swami Vivekananda would be lost in Nirvikalpa Samadhi and not come back, because that was his natural state. So here we will close and begin a new chapter next week. So let me give announcements. If there are any questions after the announcements, I'll take those, or else we will close. So on Sunday, we will have a talk at 11 o'clock, live streamed. Next week, on Tuesday, we'll have the Gita class at 7:30, live streamed. And next Thursday, the same time as this, we'll have the gospel class again. So if there are no questions, then I will give a closing chant. Oh, let me also once again announce that we are joining hands with Sewa International, a Hindu-based service organization which has a very active and big branch here in Houston. They are collecting food items to distribute to people who are in need of food assistance. And there are many of them in Houston. Houston has been very hard hit by the economic situation resulting from the pandemic. The oil industry is being hit very hard, and the unemployment level in Houston is very high. And so there's a great need for food assistance. And so we are collecting food here, and for the next several weeks, every Sunday we will deliver food to the Sewa International, and they will distribute it to people. So if you want to bring food stuffs, first find out what to bring. You can find that out on their website, or if you're on our mailing list, you received an email from us telling what foodstuffs to bring. So stick within those guidelines, don't bring other things. You can bring them here to the center, and we will deliver them to Sewa International every Sunday. Or you can give a check. And if you give a check, make it out to the VSGH, or the whole name, Vedanta Society of Greater Houston. But in the for line, then put for food relief, or for Seva food program, or something like that, something to indicate that it's for the food collection. And we will give that to Seva International. And all of it, if you give money, all of the money goes to service. It's not eaten up in administrative costs. We take nothing out of it, and Seva International uses all of it for service. So with that, I'll give a closing chant. Om Niranjanam Nityam Anantarupam Bhaktanukampa Dhrita Vigraham Vai Ishavataram Parameshamidyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namamaha.